You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lemons podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're going to make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I'm very excited for this week's episode because it is another music tech entrepreneur. If I could say it right, entrepreneur. This is with Jesper Skibsby. Now, he is the CEO and founder of the WARM Airplay Monitor. It's a radio airplay monitor, and it helps track where your music is being played. And we talk about the global radio market. We talk about what radio is doing in the world. We talk about some corrupt countries that don't have PROs and royalties and how you're able to track these types of things and kind of the deals that he's had to work out. We talk about him being a solo music tech entrepreneur and how difficult and how rewarding it can be as well. We talk about blockchain and how it's kind of redundant, but it's an interesting technology, and we're kind of waiting for somebody to kind of solve the issue of how the music royalty and musicians can be paid. And we talk about all kinds of other things as well. But Jesper is an incredibly smart young man, and he is so forthgiving with all of his information. So before I let him tell his story and we get into the conversation, I want to remind you to please sign up to my mailing list, as it helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live. I would also appreciate it if you would follow me on Instagram. I will link that in the show notes below. If you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill out the Google form, guest request form in the show notes below. I'm always looking for great, incredible movers and shakers in the music business and entertainment industry. And lastly, I would also appreciate a 5-star rating and or review on Apple Podcasts, as it greatly helps the show get boosted in Apple's algorithms and help it build a further community so I can continue working with all of these amazing guests and fans. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Jesper Skibsby. First of all, how are things doing over? You're in Denmark, right? Copenhagen?
Yes.
How's the whole pandemic, everything going over there? Are you guys safe and healthy?
Yeah, I mean, we've been affected by like everyone else, but we're slowly opening everything now, or most of it. Bars and so on is opening on Monday, so I think it looks quite good, and we're below the line in the pandemic chart, so it looks quite good.
Good. And were you guys affected quite a bit beforehand, or did you guys take the necessary precautions?
I think it's relative. There's a lot of other countries that's been much more affected. Obviously, locally, it's been a challenge for people. It's new for everyone, but I mean, I think we're pretty good.
That's good to hear. Glad to hear you guys are safe and healthy, and everything's kind of opening up again as well. I'm out in Los Angeles, California, so we're still on lockdown until I think up until August 1st. But they are starting to open things slowly over the next couple of months, but it's still kind of stressful. I'm waiting to get out of the house and start exploring the city and state again, but that's obviously won't be happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
My brother lives out there, and I get like weekly updates on the scene, and he said like not long ago, he went to the store and then the police officer was just, "You need to wear a mask." Oh shit.
Yeah. They just mandated I think it was the mayor of Los Angeles. I'm actually technically not in the city of Los Angeles. I'm in a different city. But the mayor of Los Angeles just put in a mandated order that if you're going anywhere outside, regardless if it's walking, biking, whatever, you have to wear a mask. Obviously, yeah, it's crazy, but it's good that we're taking the precautions to hopefully curb the spread of it so we can start getting back to normal. But yeah, so thanks for being on the show. I mean, we went back and forth quite a bit on trying to get this scheduled, so I'm glad we can make it happen. So yeah, why don't you kind of start by telling us who Jesper is and what you do, and a little bit about WARM too.
Sure. Well, my name is Jesper. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a music tech entrepreneur. Formerly, I've been working in the music industry in lots of different ways. I've had my own record labels in electronic music. I've been working as a manager, a radio promoter, a tour manager, booking agent. So I've kind of seen quite a lot of different views on the music industry, at least here in Denmark and Scandinavia. But this whole WARM thing actually happened because I was managing a band called Few Wolves. And I found out that they got a lot of radio airplay in Poland, which we hadn't done any promotion on or marketing efforts whatsoever. It was simply just a radio station there that actually a quite significant one that found our music or a host there and just played it. And I found out that we were played like 200 times, like we were basically in a rotation for 3-4 months. So this was like quite big for me. So I went to the major label we were signed to, and I thought I've invented the wheel. Basically, I found some data that they haven't found, and I quickly learned from a major perspective at least that they work very local. So, the Danish A&R is not necessarily interested in what's happening in Poland, and vice versa. So basically, this just gave me the idea to build a platform where everyone basically could track their radio airplays. Because maybe something is more likely to happen locally. But with the help of streaming and the way that music is distributed much more quick to everywhere in the world, that means it's also easier for curators in any form to find a new song and add it. And I don't believe in this local, necessarily priority in the music industry, because lots of things happen organically without people knowing. So the fact that you can now, for example, know that your song is played on a alternative radio station in Iceland, or I don't know, in our case, Poland or something, that just gives you a complete new set of ideas or opportunities as both an artist or record label or a manager or whatever it is.
And it's funny because it's like you said, things can happen so organically. And with the internet today, I mean, my music theoretically could be played in Belarus, and I would have no idea of knowing it, because it's so the system that is set up now. And I've had a conversation with Madonna's former manager, Camille Barbone, a couple weeks ago, and it's so hard to keep track of all these royalties and stuff that are coming in, and keep track of where your music is being played and where it's hot. And this type of system, like it's so frustrating, because it's like, I want to know where my music is being played so I can target my music, and obviously cater to all fans rather than just a local group like you had mentioned.
Yep, I totally agree. And sometimes it's the small things that can, trigger a snowball effect, especially if you know when it happens. And that's, again, back to why we made WARM, or because we want to give everyone the same opportunity to detect whenever it's played, and that's delivered in real time. So the fact is that you can make much quicker decisions than, for example, if you are on a major label, because if you're signed in France, they're not going to provide you with any kind of data outside France, unless you're like a super high priority, but then you have a manager, so it's more, it's easier for him to access that. So it's just, this kind of data is very new to the music industry, radio data in general, because there's a lot of existing sources or providers of this, but they are very divided. So we have BDS or Mediabase in the US, or we have Radio Monitor primarily in Europe, or so there's like different services catering to different markets. So there's no like major label office in France who have all all these different data points from different sources. So with WARM, you have access to basically the more than 100 countries and about I think it's 28,000 radio stations or radio channels. It is that we monitor at the moment.
Wow, that's quite a bit. And is that in every country? Are there some countries that are excluded, or can you kind of talk about the global radio market for a second, just because it's
absolutely. So we prioritize, but that's because it is a manual task to find a radio station, verify it, set up the monitoring. So we have to prioritize. But we've done it for quite a while now. So we're monitoring obviously a lot of the biggest radio stations out there, but also smaller radio stations, and usually a lot more radio stations than for example the local PROs have access to in terms of data. So and in the countries we have prioritized as well as obviously the most relevant markets. So that's everything from Americas in any form, whether it's Latin America or North America. We have African countries. In the Vatican State, we have 5 channels. We have Japan. I mean, we don't really have any radio channels or stations monitored in Mongolia and Greenland, but I mean, it's pretty well spread.
What about the ratio of radio to streaming? Because obviously streaming is so predominant versus radio, and radios always tend to be kind of last to the party, if you might say. So can you talk a little bit about how is radio still important? Is it not important? Like how does radio factor into this new equation of technology in a world of streaming?
I think the first things that comes to my mind is that streaming is very much driven by algorithms and people's playlists and so on. But where with radio you have a human alternative, because with radio you have a person that finds a song or a group of people that decides on what songs to play. And it is true that on large terrestrial national radios, it can be very difficult for a lone wolf radio host to play whatever they like. They probably have some rules, but there's a lot of radio stations, a lot that is not large national radios, whether that's college radios or whether that's genre-specific radios, like a death metal radio station in Lithuania, or if it's an alternative radio somewhere, or it's a techno radio station, or like very much hard dance or something. There's all sorts of radio stations, but no one have really accessed or have been able to access this data before, because the music industry is primarily focusing on the largest stations where there's a lot of money to be withdrawn from royalties, both on publishing side as well as neighboring rights. But there is also an alternative here in terms of the value of data, and that's also the fact that you can see where it's been played, and perhaps you're not going to make a lot of money on this particular radio station in Lithuania. But on the other hand, you have a great market insight, so to speak, because if someone there is playing your song and it's a death metal rock station and they have whatever, like 5,000 listeners on this, they're probably much more engaging fans as well, and people that are going to Shazam it. And then we're back to, we basically have a loop, because people, usually hear a song on the radio, or not necessarily, the youngest people, but you listen to a song on the radio, perhaps you Shazam it, and then you identify it, and then you're going to play it on Spotify. So there is also some sort of a loop in this. So I don't think that, radio is going anywhere. Maybe the format is going to change, or we're going to call it something different. I don't know. But I think that radio is, in reality, a quite good alternative to streaming, or a partner in that sense, so you can compare data relevance and also see that certain songs they trend a lot on streaming services or TikTok or whatever it is, and then not necessarily on radio. and but that's also because that radio is, you know, so many different things. There's everything for all kinds of niches.
I like that it's kind of a loop. And because there's been so many times where I'm out and about in a store, or I'm out take a quick car ride and I forgot my phone or something, and I don't have a music source, so I just turn the radio on and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool song. But I mean, I obviously don't have my phone in the car, so I can't Shazam it, but I kind of remember the lyrics so that I can go home and Google them. Or if I'm in the store, I usually have my phone with my grocery list on it, and I'll just quickly Shazam it, and then I'll grab it on Apple Music so then I can listen to it whenever I want. So I like that it's kind of a loop, and it kind of reminds me of those. There's like this store in a mall that I used to go to, and they would put like little food or desserts on like a tray, and it would just kind of like circle around like a toy train, and you just kind of pick whatever you wanted off of it. And that's kind of how I'm picturing the radio scene is like whenever you hear a song, you just kind of like take it or you Shazam it, and then you add it to Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever, YouTube, whatever you use to listen to your music, and then you have it at the ready whenever you want to listen to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting thing, but radio is still relevant, regardless of, you know, how many people use it, because it is still going on in stores and in your cars and things like that. But so does WARM collect royalties, or do you monitor royalties? Do you estimate them? How can you get insight on that, or is it just on plays?
Basically, what we are right now is a monitoring tool. So we monitor your song, and we'll tell you in real time whenever it's played, wherever it's played. And you can see the start and end time, the duration of the play. So you have all you need to contact your local PRO and claim something that you might haven't received. But then, you know, it's individual, case by case. How good communication do you have with your PRO? And, you know, it's just that is something that we haven't really touched in on yet, because there is so many people who want to do stuff in this space. And there's a lot of legendary agreements between PROs and distributors of this data and so on. So it's kind of like it's something that we want to try and work on, but it's it's just not something that's going to grow our business like on a month-to-month basis right now, because it's so complicated and so many people involved and different caps on. But however, we have developed a royalty calculator. So we have basically taken the minute values or second values or tariffs attached to each individual radio station in about 10 European countries as a proof of concept version, and then merge this with our database of existing radio stations, so we can basically calculate in real time a very good estimation of how much you should get based on the local tariffs, basically.
And that's just for the 10 European countries, correct?
Yes, and it's not something we have launched because it's like, I'm a little, it's like, you know, David versus multiple Goliaths kind of situation if you do this. So, and it could be very relevant to work with, you know, a big music company or a PRO for that matter on what to do with this, because it's kind of like bigger than just me, you know, having a good idea, trying to do something with this data. I think it's something that more people should collaborate about how to do it.
So what are some interesting trends that you're seeing in the radio market? Like, are you seeing a decline? What are you seeing an incline in? Are you seeing a play? Like, what genres of music are you seeing in certain countries? Like, what are some of the trends that are going on in the global radio scene that maybe some artists could be interested in going after or checking?
It's very well spread, so I think it's difficult to talk about genres as per se. I mean, I've done some web talks with different people from different areas the last couple of weeks, and it seems that like there's a very differentiated situation around radio in each country. So, for example, in Germany, if you want your music on the radio in Germany, you kind of have to use a system that is collectively owned by the radio stations in Germany called MPN. And so basically you can distribute your music to all the radio stations with this system, and that is what 99% of the radio stations uses to find your music. So you know, it's like, if you don't know that, you know, you don't have a chance almost, especially if you're an upcoming artist. So that's super interesting. And in France, it's completely opposite. They have only few large radio stations, but then they have a lot of smaller ones, which, you know, also work very independently. So they play lots of different music, and it's actually relatively easy to get in contact with these people. So, I mean, one of the key takeaways from this is that the radio markets are very, very different compared to each country.
Interesting. So I want to go back just a little bit, talk about kind of your history and getting into music. Like you said, you're obviously a music tech entrepreneur. How did you get into music tech? Are you a musician?
No, I have never done music myself. My brother is a DJ, and that sounded almost like a title for something. But he lives in LA and is doing very well, and I've grown up with him and his music career, so it was natural for me to start making events. And then I moved to Copenhagen and started to working in the music industry, worked at a record label and had these different roles. So I kind of got into the music industry autodidact or in a, you know, way. I don't have any education within the music industry. I was educated as a shipping agent.
You just kind of got educated on working in it with all because you said you were a manager, you were a tour manager, you worked on the label side. How did you work on the label side? What was your role as manager, tour manager? Who did you tour manage? How was that like? What are some things that you learned over the years?
I mean, I just learned that I love being in the music industry, but it was just, I didn't really find the right role for me. And so when I had this idea, I think back in 2012, about why isn't there a system where you can track your radio airplays, it was just, I mean, natural for me to try and pursue this, dream of seeing how you can make this. And like my first year or so, I thought that I would have to build all this myself and set up monitoring devices in all countries. And it was like, and then you got wiser and found out that there was a technology company that developed an algorithm that was something I could use for this system. And then, the business model or the business idea changed, and it's done that like a lot of times. And then finally in December 16, we got our first investment. So it's been like, a project or like a great idea that, you're working on and hope that would end up in something. But, as all good ideas, you sit with your friends and talk about it and get hyped. And, it's rare that something really comes to life unless you are like a strong team and you share the same mindset and direction and all that. And I was just like a guy with an idea. I mean, I know nothing about technology. I have a hard time making code in Excel. I'm like, it was just like, I don't think it was written in the cards that was going to happen. And I think people around me thought that it was, great idea, but maybe you should go back to shipping.
So now let's talk about that kind of transition. You had an idea and you started your business. I want to talk about kind of that initial kind of fire that you had. Obviously, you saw a niche in the industry. You saw that there was a problem and you solved it. So can you talk about that kind of transition into being just kind of a guy with an idea into a music tech entrepreneur, and what that journey was like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was just because, you see, so you learn so much, doing this kind of, idea process or trying to build some kind of foundation for a company. You learn a lot if you're hungry for the information. And I saw a lot of shows. I went to a lot of conferences, talked with a lot of people. I spend a lot of time on the internet trying to understand what services are out there, how does it work, what are they priced at, and the more I learned and talked with people. Same with, I had a lot of talks with the PROs in general and major labels for that matter, but it seemed like that there was just a missing link here or something. That it was just, the more I learned, it was clear to me that this product just doesn't exist. I mean, especially not to the, let's say, the 90% of the industry. All the small indie labels or upcoming or medium-sized or whatever, all, as we call it, music entrepreneurs. Whether you're an artist or a manager or a label, you work with your brand as a company, right? So it was just, the fire was just to say, how can we make something where everyone can access this information? Because it's just plain stupid that people don't have access to it.
Interesting. And I mean, what were some of the struggles that you came across as you were starting up this company? Did you start it with any friends, any family members? Was it just you?
It was basically just me. I spoke with a lot of people, also close people and friends and family, but I was basically a solo founder. So yeah, it was. It's been challenging, I would say.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially going into such a music tech world. Like, that is such it needs to be an innovative thing, because music technology is kind of at this turning point where 5-10 years ago, half the music tech startups didn't even exist. And some of the technology that's coming out now is like groundbreaking. It's like revolutionizing and updating all the technology and the business models that existed in the music business. So it's like trying to get into this music tech world is a feat in itself. And I can imagine there were so many struggles. So what were some of those struggles, and like, what did you kind of overcome?
We managed to launch a product that was accessible 3 months after we got an investment, and I mean, now everyone can use it. So, but some of the struggles I've come across was PROs, performance rights organizations. They have agreements with certain deliverables or certain companies, and it's very, very difficult to come and provide something new. There is, I'm sorry to say, but in some countries it's basically corrupt. PROs in general, and so it can be very challenging to try and sell something that provides a lot more data than they're used to, and maybe they're not necessarily interested in it. For example, I've seen a tendency that in the good countries, and let's call them Denmark or Germany or UK or something like that, where the PROs are pretty well working and in important markets, it's probably about 20% of the radio stations that has an actual rate attached. So what all the music that is played on more or less 80%, in the good cases, 80% of the radio stations in the country, they just pay blanket license fees, and nobody is really monitoring them or distributing the royalties based on what's been played. They all the different countries, all different societies has different ways to distribute these money. Some uses sample tests, which they tell the radio station in advance, obviously, because they're not monitoring it. And, some distributes it after market shares on other radio channels, which doesn't really make sense, because a lot of smaller or medium-sized radio stations, they play a lot more different music than the biggest commercial ones. So it's very, very challenging. And that is also why we find it much more relevant to sell the data to everyone else. And by that, we also hope eventually that we will have a critical mass where people will start raising questions to, for example, their PROs. But it's probably likely that the changes are going to come in those countries where it is not, bad, but really bad, or countries where they don't even have a PRO yet. So that could be an African country, for example. So I think that actually it is more possible for us to do changes in some of these kind of countries than it is to make changes with the biggest music markets.
And you mentioned, as you were answering that question, some of the countries, there's good countries and there's some of them were quote unquote corrupt. Can you explain what that means?
I mean, that means that there are some countries where, for example, in Greece, there was, I believe it was the Neighboring Rights Association or organization, which had an administration fee of 104%. So basically, no money was distributed. They basically had to earn more money to sustain the organization. Like, it's family owned. It's run like a very, very poor business.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, that means there's a fee of 104%. 100% would be everything. And then, so basically you're paying them 4% extra to collect your royalties. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I don't think that they were able to charge any money. But the financial yearly report was just the fact that they spent more than they have actually earned, so they couldn't distribute anything. And if you see something, for example, in Spain, they basically got the society there basically got thrown out of CSAC. It's like, which is like it's like the mother organization of the societies, because they didn't report correctly, and they had made this invention called the wheel, where certain big artists or songwriters or publishers was invited into a certain system where the government channels, radio and TV and such, used this bunch of songs. So it was just absurd, because in this situation, if I believe correctly, then the TV stations, for example, had a kickback because they got like co-publishing rights and such. It's like terrible situations.
Yikes.
And then we have some countries that doesn't even have any kind of society. And then we have, obviously some that are pretty good and well functioning.
I mean, you obviously can monitor the plays in, say, a country that doesn't have a PRO, which was like Africa, right? There's some African countries that do not have a PRO, correct?
Mm.
So how would you go about collecting those royalties, or how can you monitor, are those royalties even able to be collected?
I mean, I'm seeing a situation where a certain country suddenly wants to create a PRO because they want to sustain their artists, or they want to make a sustainable culture in their music industry. It's an industry that's everything else. So then if they want to build a new organization with a new system, it is much more likely that we will be able to participate in something like that, rather than us coming into one of the major societies in the UK or whatever, and try to provide them with the new data and basically kick out their old delivery. And I just it's just too big of a task in the current stage for a company of our size, because we can create so much so fast, but just particularly around royalties, it's just a complete mess, and very, very challenging. And we just don't have the efforts to tackle that right now. But at least we created a calculator, so hopefully we can launch that sometime this year. And then people will actually be able to see how much their airplays are worth. And then again, it's up to the individual to take the challenge with their PROs at the current stage.
It sounds like, yeah, it's for an artist or a manager or whoever is working with the artist or songwriters or whomever. It sounds like, collecting royalties has always been a challenge, and there's so many companies out there that are trying to kind of automate it and make it super easy to do. But we're making great progress, and there are companies that are really trying to do it. But it's just that this collection of royalties, it's stuck in the, 50 years ago. It's so outdated that it's going to take some time to do that. And for artists or managers or whomever to have to go out and manually collect and claim these things and work with these companies. And then these companies get so, overwhelmed because they only have a certain amount of staff that deals with these things, that it takes time. And there's always going to be bumps. And it's just a task that nobody wants to do. But at the same time, it's like, if you want to get paid, you've got to do it. So I'm waiting for the day that a company comes out or one of the existing companies kind of revolutionizes, and there's one place where all these things can be collected, and it's just something as simple as a click of a button. Because, like you said, it's kind of a mess and it's kind of corrupt, and there's just too many things going on right now that makes it too difficult for an artist to go in and actually earn the money that they've rightfully earned.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple of years ago, we had a kind of a, I don't know, funny but new situation where at all the conferences everything was blockchain, and there's no question that is super relevant for the future of the industry. But there were so many different companies that all wanted or still wants for them that are still alive, to solve the same things. And I'm like, the only question I had, like, who of you are going to win this game? Because you're not going to share each other's data. So either, all of you join forces or only one of you win. And so what is it going to be? So it's, still no one haven't really solved it from what I've seen. And again, I think it's not so much about solving this. It's solving the technical side. It's more about getting the integrations with all the different organizations and major label structures, etc. that owns the shit. So I think the implementation is the major challenge here.
Yeah, I'm always getting pitches from publicists or companies about blockchain this, blockchain that. And it's so, like, I get so overwhelmed with it because it's like there's so many people trying to do the same thing. And I haven't looked a lot into it just because I get them so much that I just kind of like delete them. And I'm more focused. I like to write about the tech and stuff, but when I get the same thing over and over again, it's like, how much innovation can 100 companies doing the same thing actually really do? Like, if your goal is to do the same thing, you're obviously going to run into obstacles where you're going to be collecting the same data. Maybe you have a few tweaks where you're doing it just a little bit differently. And obviously every company is going to have an excuse or reason as to why they're better than company C and D.
Or unique.
Or unique, exactly. And at that point, you're giving consumers and prosumers too many options. And then nobody wants to deal with it. They're like, oh, I'll just wait for somebody to come up with something that's, not blockchain and it's different. That's how I am. Like, if I'm getting pitched 600 different blockchain companies, they're all doing the same thing. It's like, well, you're all doing essentially the same thing, and the goal is the same. So I don't know who to pick, and I don't have the time to sit down and look through and watch and research. I don't have time for that. So yeah, it's getting to be a saturated market. But I get and I applaud people who are trying to solve an issue and carve out a niche for themselves. But at the same time, it's like, we've got to look at different angles. Like, there's obviously more than one way to solve this.
I agree. And speaking of niche, that is basically what we found in terms of WARM, because, like, again, if we take the competitors in this space, they all primarily sell their data to large companies or organizations. We sell it on a price per song, so everyone can access it if they want to pay €5 or whatever. And then we have these, and then it is bigger. They have bigger. We have bigger coverage, whereas the existing platforms, they have very limited coverage. It's very local or divided at least. and then it's only based on the larger terrestrial or national radios primarily. So, for example, as I mentioned before, I think we're monitoring 1,000 radio stations in Germany, but only 200 of them has an actual tariff or minute rate attached. So that means that there are 800 radio stations that most likely are not being reported because the data suppliers that sells the data to the society, if they don't use the data on these 800 stations, they don't want to buy that because they know who to charge, and then the money they receive, they're going to distribute back to the rights holders. But then it's going to be different songs. It's not going to be the ones that's played. So it's like, we have a big differential between the existing solutions where they, sell expensive and heavy data, and we have, a large coverage. And we don't really have any competitors in this space. And if you take something like, other data sets or analytics like Spotify data or social media data, there is also overwhelmingly a lot of analytics companies, but they all, kind of sell the same data from streaming service, etc., whether that's SoundCharts or Chartmetric or Fortunes or, there's a lot of these companies. So, and still new ones popping up to be fair. So at least we're in a very secure space because we don't really have any kind of competition in this, accessibility versus coverage.
And have you ever used Chartmetric before?
Yes, I have tried it. I've still got their emails, and I've talked a lot with Sung earlier. I think Chartmetric is super cool, but there's just a lot of competition in this space.
Yeah, I agree. I've used Chartmetric as well, and it's incredible the detail that they have, and it's like that's the type of whenever I think of music analytics, I always think of Chartmetric because it is, granted, it is a little bit expensive. It's like $140 or $50 US per month. Which can be pricey for an analytics tool, but you are getting what you're paying for because it is one single dashboard where you can log in and you can see every streaming platform, you can see social media platforms, you can see previous trends. I mean, it is so incredibly detailed that it is, if you're making extra money on music and you have some extra that you want to maybe take a month and spend the $150 to look into your analytics and really do a deep dive, it's definitely worth it. I mean, I sound like I'm promoting Chartmetric, and to an extent I am, but it's such an incredible tool, and I always want to share tools that I find useful for musicians and music professionals. So yeah, Chartmetric is great.
Yeah, I agree. And but for example, I think 4 weeks ago, the guys from 1001 Tracklist, which is just a different kind of company. They get these DJ sets from different, festivals and upload them, and then people, especially DJs, go and find these new upcoming tracks, new remixes or edit or whatever, and that's super cool. But these guys also released something called Song Stats. So that's like an alternative to Chartmetric, but then you pay per artist that you want to monitor. And then it's I think it's $10 per month or something per artist. So, then suddenly something new comes in. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a very competitive space, but none of them have really a really good radio monitoring system. I know that the Chartmetric have added, I can't remember how many, if it's 1,000 or 2,000 or something radio channels. So that's cool. But but a lot of competition in this space with analytics in general. And of course, everyone, just as you mentioned before, wants just preferably one system with everything in. And that's where we have kind of took a step back in this field and just say we just want to focus about radio and all the different things that we can do with that. So we're also looking at we're working with some machine learning guys from a university about trying to build a hit prediction score. So we can basically analyze previous songs and see how their trends have been, and try to build a system that can detect when will you see radio hits on what songs if they follow a certain trend. For example, the first 3 weeks, then we can hopefully predict with some sort of accuracy how many plays it will look like in 3 months or so. So that's a new kind of product, but again, very focused around radio and not really all these other data sources.
Artificial intelligence is a whole beast in itself, and it's kind of one of those things that have just like recently been headlines in the last couple of years. I mean, it's always been around, but to an extent where it is today, where on top of all these blockchain companies, they're also using some type of artificial intelligence for their data, and that's part of their quote unquote uniqueness that makes them stand out. But yeah, we have automation, we have artificial intelligence in cars, we have artificial intelligence in music making. I mean, we have artificial intelligence, computers and technology that's making music and releasing them on Spotify. In fact, I love a song by an artificial intelligence. I think it's like Skig. I don't remember what it was. I'd have to find it, but I'll link it in the show notes. But it writes music. They ran it through a bunch of different songs through it, and then boom, they came out with this song. There's also one that recently, which blew my mind. They ran a bunch of Joe Rogan episodes of his podcast and him talking through, and then the artificial intelligence learned his voice and then came up with something, and it sounded just like Joe Rogan, but it was artificial intelligence. It wasn't him recorded or talking. It was the artificial intelligence crafting his voice. It was so impressive, and it sounded just like him and stuff that he would actually say. I mean, it's just like this technology is so cool and so crazy, and it's so cool to see it implemented in music too. Like I'm seeing, it's so cool.
I mean, we're working with AI in different forms as well. We also did some tests on actually trying to build a system where you can send a song to a radio stations where we compare the parameters of the song and analyzes it and compared with the other songs that have been played. So basically a similarity score, if you want to call it that. So that could also be super relevant for promotion.
Are you listening? What kind of music do you primarily listen to? Is it electronic music?
I listen a lot to jazz when I'm home. And then actually I have this radio station called Retro Radio, and they play mostly music from 60s and 70s. I usually just listen to old stuff. And then I love techno and electronic music in general. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I primarily listen to electronic music, but sometimes it's nice to just get away from the craziness that can ensue in electronic music and listen to real human instruments in jazz or classical, because electronic music, as you know, can be quite harsh for certain scenarios.
But speaking to what you said before, I mean, I don't think it's. I think it's very possible that we're gonna see like AI pop stars or whatever genre, rock star or something. And that's where they're probably gonna create like a character, maybe around AI basically, and these will be hyped like Pokemon or whatever.
Yeah, and it's only a matter of time, because the thing with artificial intelligence is that it continually gets better. The more you feed it, the smarter it gets, and it's just like it's not like a human where you can literally set it overnight and say, "Hey, read this science book from front to cover," and then you're going to learn every word. Well, with an artificial intelligence, you could have it read that book 3, 4, 5 times, and then it would literally read the whole book. So it's like it's only going to get smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. It's a scary thought, but it's also very interesting because as one of my heroes and one of my icons that I look up to is Elon Musk, and he's always warned about the artificial intelligence and how it can really take over if we're not going to be careful with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting and somewhat frightening what this will be in many different industries.
Yeah, but you got me thinking that like that's an interesting concept, like creating an artificial intelligence character and then going to an artificial intelligence concert. Like that's weird, but that's cool.
But it's most likely gonna happen sooner.
Somebody's going to happen, and I want in on it.
Yeah.
I want some say in it because I think that would be so cool. Cool. I think we should. That's a great place to kind of wrap it up. I got to get to work in a couple minutes here. So, thank you so much for being on the show, Jesper. This was a great conversation. We covered so much ground in radio and music and royalties and everything. So, how can the listeners follow up with you if they have any questions on anything you said, or just keep up with you, a WARM, and your contributions to the music tech world?
Well, everyone can reach me on my email. It's js@warm.ninja. Otherwise, just contact warmmusic.net. That's where we're based. We just launched warmcharts.com actually, so you have like a free access to global radio charts now. So that's also pretty cool. People can check out. But I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, but it's possible to find me.
Yeah, cool. I will link all of those links in the show notes below so everybody can easily reach out if they have any questions and keep up with you as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me, Leno.
You're welcome, Jesper. Thanks for being on the show, and have a great weekend and take care of yourself.
You too, my friend.